when you're in front of an audience, you want to capture attention and pull people in, get them involved. And that can be a challenge. You ever stood in front of an audience and you notice some of the signs that people just aren't paying attention? You know that frustration when you start feeling it's just not going well. I'm not really getting them involved. Well, one thing to keep in mind is that speaking is storytelling. And unless you're explaining how to do something, pretty much you want to keep your speaking in some form or another in the form of a story. Now, the great thing about it is when you use stories is that you can get people involved pretty quickly if you tell interesting, engaging stories, which can be a challenge, can be an issue. But fortunately, you do have a place where you can go for an example of how to tell some pretty interesting stories. And that place is movies. Movies do a really good job of telling stories. In fact, you can say a movie is simply a story. That's all it is. The only thing keeping you there for an hour and a half, for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, 3 hours, whatever it is, keeping you in your seats watching that movie is the story. And so, because it's so important for people making movies to tell engaging stories, that noticing movies and focusing on movies can help you to learn how to tell some really engaging and interesting stories. Because there are some things movies do, some simple things movies do you probably never thought about that engage you, that pull you in. Movies do so simply, so naturally, you're just like, oh, of course, yeah, that's just the way it goes. But there is some thought behind it. There's some ideas behind it. And it's in understanding these thoughts and these ideas and the way the movie is put together that you can become a better speaker by observing and using those particular techniques. Now, one technique probably you're already aware of. Maybe you're already doing it. If not, you certainly should be. But it's a simple, powerful technique which movies use to some extent, get you going. But there are two other techniques that take a little bit more planning, a little bit more thought, a little bit more attention to the story, but they can pay off in a big way. Huge. Just huge. If you use them and make them work. These simple techniques will really go a long way in making your speech more interesting and more engaging. And so, once you're using these techniques, when you look out in your audience and you see people leaning in, interested, involved, really focused, paying attention, you'll know that your okay speech is becoming a good speech. Your audience notices that. Because the story you're telling in your speech is a more interesting, more engaging story. Now that you're really aware of what you're doing and applying some very specific techniques to pull people in, engage them, and really involve them in your speech and in your story at a whole deeper, stronger, more powerful level. And it begins with the simplest thing. It's so simple, so basic. Probably, as mentioned, you're already doing it. Maybe you're doing it without realizing it. And if you do become more aware of it, how to use it, then you can really develop that story. But maybe you're not. And the sign that you're not using this particular technique is that your audience is disengaged. How your audience shows disengagement differs from audience to audience. But one thing they can do is fold their hands, look around the room. And if you notice any of those things going on with a few people in your audience, probably not a big deal. But if you notice most of your audience is doing that, then you do have a problem. The good news is that problem is pretty easy to fix. Pretty simple. It just involves in doing something that you're probably already aware of, but maybe just never really worked on and focused on. Once you start to work on and focus on it, you can bring that audience back. Get them more engaged, get them more interested, get them at least interested in what's going on and what you're talking about. And this is something that movies do all the time. I mean, the challenge of a movie is what's going on in the movie. And so it's some very specific things they do in movies to make this happen. In fact, before the movie even comes on, sometimes there'll be other movies showing right at the beginning, a bunch of other movies. And there are very specific things they're doing there for the reason they're showing these other movies. As you wait for your movie to come on and you're looking at these other movies, something is happening to you. The movie people, although they're only showing one movie, somehow are finding a way to show all these other movies, and it's causing a definite effect on you. And it's because of the way they're showing these movies that makes it so powerful. What they're doing is they're opening up your curiosity. Curiosity. Before your movie even comes on, there are all these little bits and pieces of other movies. And they show a little scene here and a little scene there and a little scene there all over the place. Now, you don't know what the whole movie is. But you see just enough to kind of wonder, what are the parts you're not seeing? You see just enough to think, wow, if this scene is here and this scene is here, that's what kind of interesting stuff. What's the rest of the movie like? At least that's what the movie people want you to be thinking. So although they haven't gotten to your movie itself, already they're getting you curious about other movies you didn't even plan to think about. You weren't even on your radar. But all of a sudden there's other movies you're thinking, well, maybe. Maybe that one could be a good one, or that one might be a good one. Previews, they call them. Really, they're curiosity views. Little bits, little slices, its only purpose is to get you curious about seeing the rest of the movie. And you don't see enough to really be able to put everything together. You see just enough to wonder, how is it put together? How does all these parts fit into the whole? And if they really do their job well, and they have a good movie, you'll see these little bits and you'll think, oh, I got to see the whole thing. As a speaker, you can do that pretty easily. Just mention some of the benefits people are going to get later on in your speech. At the very beginning, talk a little bit about the things you're going to talk about. Get people involved, pull them in, get that curiosity going by getting little pieces here and there of your story at the very beginning. And then the audience can get engaged. That's simple. There's another technique that's very powerful, but not as simple. All right, now your audience is curious. You're given a speech and you're given little teeny hints at what's going on. The beginning of your speech is like one of those movie previews of the whole speech. The beginning of your speech starts out with coming attractions for all the things the audience is going to get along the way. And so your audience is at least curious, at least interested, at least more involved they would be if they didn't have these little hints of what's going to happen. And curiosity can go a ways. It can go a ways to engage the audience and get them interested, get them involved. But there's another thing you can do in your story. It's kind of a power move. It's kind of a power move on the audience. And it involves the audience very strongly. And it gets the audience to feel a certain way. And that way really engages them and gets them involved and gets them wondering. Whereas with curiosity, they're just kind of thinking, oh, well, here's something going on, and how's this going to go on? With this other technique, it gets them really specifically wondering about things. It's a kind of whereas curiosity is kind of a random wondering, oh, I wonder what's going to happen. This technique is a very focused wondering. And because the audience is wondering in a very focused sort of a way, they start to pay a little bit more attention and they focus their attention. Because they're looking for something. When you use this technique, your audience is looking for something. They're thinking, oh, okay, let me pay attention and see what's going on here. Because of something you set up in your story. Something you set up in your story gets your audience wondering and looking for something as they're going through your story. And because they're wondering and looking for something, they're paying pretty darn close attention. And that's what happens when you start using this character technique about building suspense. Suspense. And suspense is simply where the character has knowledge here, but you let the audience know something the character doesn't. So your knowledge is that the audience is up here, what's going on. Character goes to their own world, completely unaware of this situation that the audience knows about. And in suspense, or in horror, quite often that thing the audience knows about will have very drastic effect on the character. One of the most common things in horror is the guy hiding behind the door with the knife. Somewhere along the way in the movie has shown the audience the guy coming into the room, turning out the lights, hiding behind the door with the knife in his hand. And then later on in the movie, the character comes into the room, a well-lighted room, and they just kind of doing the stuff they're doing. In the meantime, we in the audience can see the guy behind the door with the knife. And the one thing you know in a movie is, guy's a knife, somebody's going to get stabbed. But when? When exactly is that going to happen? That builds the suspense. The same thing in your story. Just tell the audience a little bit about something about what's going on at a high level, and then have the audience have to wait until the character discovers what the audience already knows. The audience will then pay close attention to see when is that point where the character really gets what's happening that the audience already knows. And that can engage them. But there's one thing you can do that's even a little more engaging. All right, curiosity works really well. get people interested, get people involved, little hints at what's going on in your story, what's going on in your speech. The audience at the beginning is like, oh, okay, yeah, we'll see where this goes. See what happens, because they're curious. And then you take curiosity and you add in suspense. Now the audience has all this knowledge up here, and they're following along the story, seeing where the character's going, and they're just wondering, in a horror movie or a suspense movie, when are they going to get it? When is the bad thing going to happen? And they just wait it out. Now the challenge is suspense. If it goes on too long, it becomes boring. So it's kind of this balance that has to happen. And eventually it has to happen because the audience already knows about it. So if it just goes on too long, it's like, no big deal. Which is a risk of suspense. Which is why the last technique can kind of counterbalance that. Curiosity will work very well in getting the audience interested, and that's great. Of course, you want to make sure the audience does get to that part you've been teasing about, that's interesting to the audience. And then if you add suspense in there, now all of a sudden the audience knows something, superior knowledge, and they're waiting for something to happen to the character. Okay, hey, that's a major thing. And those can work pretty darn well. If you just use those two techniques, go pretty far in your story. But if you're willing to do a little bit more planning, a little bit more thought, a little more work on the character, there's one more technique you can use to be very effective in getting people involved and getting people interested, getting them into the story. And it's similar to suspense, but it's different. Kind of similar to suspense, the way it's set up, but it's different because the way that the audience and the character work in this situation is opposed to suspense. Suspense, as you know, is, hey, the audience knows everything is going on, and then character doesn't, the audience waits for something to happen to the character. The final technique is surprise. Surprise is the reverse. So instead of the audience knowing everything and the character doesn't know, it's reversed. The character knows something the audience doesn't know. And if you tell a story where your character knows something your audience doesn't know, then you have a surprise. Audience doesn't know what's going to happen. Now sometimes you can spring the surprise in your audience. And that's a common thing. Or just out of nowhere, boom, something happens. And that's certainly a way to do it. But another way to do it is let the audience know the character knows something the audience doesn't know. And this you see in movies all the time, where the character has this knowledge the audience has no clue about. And the audience has to kind of wait to figure out what's going to happen, or what does that mean. These days, with the commonness of the cell phone, a situation might be where a character gets somebody texts them a text message on their phone. They glance at it, and then they go away. Maybe they run out of a meeting they're at, or they break off a talk with their friend, whatever it is. This disturbs them enough that they go off somewhere. Now the audience has no clue. The character knows, of course, who was on the phone and what the text message was and why they're going off for them. The audience has no idea about this. None. So they kind of have to guess about what's going to happen on, but when it finally happens, it is a surprise they didn't expect. And you can do the same thing with your characters. Just have a character who knows something's going on, and then either spring it on the audience or let the audience wait until the character reveals that thing the audience has been waiting for. And that really can engage people. You want to engage and pull the audience in, and you can do it the same way than movies do it. One simple way is by using curiosity. Get your audience curious about what's going to happen. Just as a movie is previews at the beginning of the movie about what's going to happen later on in the movie, little bits and pieces of that movie so you get a sense, oh, okay, maybe I'll see the whole movie. You can give little bits and pieces of your speech at the beginning of your speech. Let the audience know what's going on. Give it kind of coming attractions of what's going to go on in your speech. Make them interesting, engaging. The audience will stick around to find out what exactly is going on with the other parts that aren't mentioned, and what exactly is it that you were hinting at. The audience has to wait to finally get. You can also use suspense, where the audience has this great knowledge of what's going on, that the character has no idea. And the audience knows this, but they don't know when the character will find out what the audience already knows. Greatly effective in horror films, used all the time in horror films, and other such films involve suspense. And then the audience follows along. First, the audience feels like, hey, I'm special. I know this stuff the other guy doesn't, his character doesn't. And they have to wait, okay, when will this character finally catch up to where I am? And what will happen when they finally do? In horror films, as mentioned, when they finally do catch up and know what the audience knows, usually it's a very, very bad scene. In your stories, of course, it doesn't need to be that way. But when the audience knows something the character doesn't know, and then the character learns it later, that can have a profound effect on the character and on the story. And then finally, think about surprise. Instead of the audience knowing what the character doesn't know, it switches. The character knows something the audience doesn't know. The character has some awareness of something going on. The audience has no clue that this is going on. And that forces the audience to pay really close attention. The audience has to follow that character along everywhere they go, just to see when are they going to let out the thing that they know. And if you let the audience know, hey, there's something you don't know that this character knows, then the audience will follow along and pay close attention. Or you can simply spring a surprise at them, or something happens the audience didn't expect at all. But again, it all has to do with the character's superior. Now, the character knows something the audience doesn't, and the surprise comes out of that. You want to engage, of course, and pull your audience in. One simple way to do it is do the way movies have been doing it for decades. Simple, powerful, easy way to tell stories, to engage people, to pull them in, and they're making movies millions of dollars. And certainly should help you pull people and engage people with your speeches. Using techniques like curiosity to engage people, little previews of what's going on, or suspense. The audience has this great knowledge the character doesn't, or surprise. The character knows something the audience doesn't, forces people to pay attention, to lean in, almost against their will. They're drawn in because of the very nature of people. To want to know more, to want to find out more, to want to learn, to want to figure things out, to want to see how it all fits together. It's the power of the story and the power of your speech that you're telling. Getting that speech involved, getting that speech working, all has to do about putting all those parts together and using curiosity, suspense, surprise in a story, gauges, pulls the audience in, and really gets them thinking, gets them involved, gets them thinking, oh, what's going to happen next? Oh, didn't expect that. That's so interesting. It's a simple, powerful way to make your stories work harder and better for you. So your speech is your story. Make sure your speech is engaging and interesting to the audience as it can possibly be.